Do you remember when you were trying to learn how to ride a bicycle? Years ago, you struggled to learn a skill, something that you could use to get around your neighborhood. Most of us, though, know how to ride a bicycle now, and though it may have been years since we've gotten on one, still, it's the kind of thing you just don't forget. 3 years ago, I bought a computer. I didn't know anything about computers. I don't know much more now, but at least I know how to turn the thing on. Most activities that we're engaged in require skill. The more important something is to us, the more skill it usually requires. And with the need for skill comes the need to think hard about what we're doing, to think carefully about how to do it well, to get some training if necessary, in order to develop the skills that we need. But what about relationships? How much training have we had at relationship skills? How many classes have you taken in getting along, listening 101 or getting to know you 204? How much training and thought has gone into our relationship skills? Some of us fell into some skills that are really good. Some of us fell into some skills that are not so good. But I think all of us would benefit by stepping back for a little while, looking closely at our skills, and thinking about how we can hone them so that we can relate to each other in a better way. Last time, we talked about some relationship attitudes. Good intentions are wonderful. Good attitudes are wonderful. But they're not enough. We're going to have to couple good attitudes about relationships with good skills about relationships. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to discuss some relationship skills. And in particular, we're going to focus on one group of skills, communication skills. How do we communicate in the body in order to facilitate relationships? That's what we're going to be discussing today. I hope you'll enjoy this session.
We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. We are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. And we pray that our unity may one day be restored. And they'll know we are Christians by our love, by our love, yes, they'll know. Christians by our love. We will walk with each other, we will walk hand in hand. We will walk with each other, we will walk hand in hand, and together.
To answer a question before you've heard it out is both stupid and insulting. Pretty strong words. But they're strong to emphasize the importance of listening to relationships. Relationships live and die with our ability to listen. And that's true of any relationship. Listening is to relationship what food is to the body. It builds and nourishes and strengthens relationship. Whether it be with a spouse or with a child or with a friend, we've got to listen to each other in order to enter in very fully to relationships. So it shouldn't surprise us when we turn to the church and think about relationships in the church that listening becomes a very important skill. Now, as a body of people, we want to be very sure that we're always ready to listen to God. But are we as eager to listen to the people for whom God died? Jesus was a good listener. His heart was always open for the needs of other people. His ears were always available for others to pour out their sorrows. He listened to blind Bartimaeus, who cried out over the crowd, asking, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." He heard a widow weeping as she was going out to bury her only son. He listened to the plea of a thief dying on a cross. Jesus was a listener. He was always available for people. But we don't do quite so good a job of listening, do we? For many of us, listening is no more than a convenient time in which we're able to think about what we're going to say next. We just have not learned to listen at times quite as well as we ought to. When other people talk, we don't always hear. When we hear, we don't always listen. And when we listen, we don't always make the effort to try to understand. Sometimes it seems that not only do we not listen to people, we just kind of endure what they have to say until it's our turn to talk next. What kind of a listener are you? Are you a good listener? Take a little test with me if you would, and let's see what kind of listener you are. Do you finish other people's sentences for them? Do you interrupt people frequently? Do you think you know what other people are going to say even before they say it? In a conversation, do you spend most of your time talking or with your mouth closed? Do you try to do other things while you're supposed to be listening? What kind of a listener are you? To a great extent, that's going to determine what kinds of relationships you develop. James tells us that everyone should be quick to listen and slow to speak. Now we can understand that. We hear the words. Our problem comes in that we just don't do it. We know how to listen. We listen real good to our television sets. We listen even sometimes to our spouses. Can we learn to listen to our brothers and sisters in the Lord? If we're going to develop good relationships in the church, it demands that we learn the necessary skill of listening to each other.
Solomon says, "A fool thinks he's always right, but wise is the man who listens to advice." Proverbs 12 and verse 15. Tim has suggested that listening is an important relationship skill or behavior. We need to learn to listen to learn. Listening for criticism, learning from that criticism. Criticism to a fool is like pouring water on a duck's back, but to a wise man is helpful. In our relationships with each other, it is important that we learn to listen for education. That we listen for what our brothers are saying to us, our sisters are saying to us, in a sense that we are here to learn. The word disciple in the New Testament comes from the word mathetes, which means learner. God does not want us to be foolish. He that heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them is wise. He who hears and doesn't do is foolish. The fool is already made up his mind. He is the kind of fellow that says, "You can't tell me a thing. I already know it all." How do you feel around people who think they know it all? And how do you think people feel around you if you think you know it all? In our last lesson, we talked about the attitude of listening and getting rid of vain conceit and selfish ambition. It is with this attitude that we can really begin to learn. A relationship skill is to learn. Learning from criticism of others. One of the things that I have really had to struggle with is this concept of criticism. I don't like to be criticized. Somebody says something to me and I immediately almost go into a tailspin. Either I get mad or I go into depression. It's something that we must as Christian people learn. Learn to look at criticism, evaluate criticism, and make the changes that are necessary. Who is better qualified to offer criticism than our brother in the church, than our sister in the church? It is only when we learn to listen well and to accept the criticism and learn from that criticism that our relationships in the church can grow. Herein is the difficulty. But there are two sides to criticism. The first side is the acceptance of criticism. And that's difficult enough. The second side is the person who gives criticism. Criticism can be given in a poor way. David Augsburger has written several books on these subjects. One he's written, Caring Enough to Confront. And I believe he's the one who coined the phrase or the word care-fronting. Somehow we as critics must be constructive critics, helping people. And I'll develop that a little more later in this series.
We want to move now to another relationship skill that has to do not so much with listening to other people or from learning from what we hear, as it has to do with telling other people, especially what we feel. Sometimes we as Christians have a little difficulty speaking our love for each other. Or we've all been told about the importance of telling our spouse that we love them or telling our child that we love them. But how much more important is that in the church, in the fellowship of God's people? Love, like truth, must be communicated if it's going to be understood. We as Christians need to tell each other that we love each other. That's a vital skill that we've got to learn if relationships are going to flourish in the local church. Solomon made a statement that really confronts us on this issue. He says that open reproof is better than love concealed. Now, do you hear that? Solomon is saying it's better to speak harshly towards each other than it is not to speak your love to each other. That's a powerful point, Solomon. We all ought to be sensitive to the power of harsh words. Harsh words can hurt, and we know the effect they can have on people. But we ought also to be as sensitive to the power that unspoken words can have. Unspoken words of affection and of love and of feeling for each other can also be harmful. Solomon says it's even more harmful not to speak your love than it is to speak harshly. Open reproof is better than love concealed. When was the last time you told a Christian that you loved them?
Proverbs 16:24, Solomon said, "Kind words are like dripping honey, sweet on the tongue and health for the body." Another relationship skill that we must learn in the church if we're to promote healthy people in the church is the concept of speaking in a way that's helpful, edification, building people up, imparting grace to those who hear. If we can learn to do this effectively, then we can promote health in the body. We promote construction, not destruction. Someone has said that there is power in words, and certainly that is the case. There's an old saying that says, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never harm me." How untrue that is, and how destructive it is, because we recognize that words can be destructive. They have great power to build up, but they also have great power to tear down. When we talk to our brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to be aware of the fact that the way we say things is as important as what we say. Our attitude and our skill in talking to our brothers is going to either be destructive or constructive. A few years ago, I was sitting after dinner talking with a man, and he said, "I want to talk to you." And I said, "Okay, let's talk." He said, there's a man in the church here who has done a certain thing, and it's now in the community, and people know about it, and it's hurting the church. And he said, I want to know what to do. And we talked for a long time about what this brother had done and how we could go and talk to him and tell him that he's hurting the church. And after we did that, I thought, we did it all wrong. We should have gone to him and said to him, "I know you've done this wrong. It's in the community and it's hurting the church." But our next statement should have been, "How may we help? What can we do to help you? And that's the way we as Christians need to go to our brothers, in a care-fronting way, and say, how may we help you to be better, to promote your health in the body, because we really care for you. Another thing that happened, I read a few months ago about a woman who was brought into court for burning her husband. And the judge said, woman, why in the world did you burn your husband? And she said, the Bible told me to. And he said, it did. Where in the Bible does it say? Well, she said, the Bible said you ought to heap coals of fire on his head. And he started to get me mad, and I just heaved them right over his head. Well, the Bible does say we ought to heap coals of fire upon others, but not literal coals of fire. Romans 12 and verse 20 says, if an enemy says, I'm hungry, give him something to eat. If he says, I'm thirsty, give him something to drink. For by so doing, you will heap coals of fire upon his head. A soft answer turns away wrath. Grievous words stir up anger. Loving your enemies and loving your brothers will cause us to speak carefully how we say it and what we say. Because kind words are like dripping honey, sweet on the tongue, and health for the body.
After all has been said about communication and about the importance of relationship skills in this area, you know, in the final analysis, what is communicated by us or by others is intended to change behavior. It's intended to change what we do, to say words or to hear words. But for those words not to have any impact on the way we live is ludicrous. We have to respond to what we say and to what we do, and to make our words and our actions synonymous with each other. I want to suggest to you that we as Christians must be very careful that our actions back up our words. You see, it's not enough for us to say we love each other. We have to act lovingly towards each other. It's not enough for us just to speak words of love and to talk about these great relationships we're supposed to have in the Lord. We're going to have to start living those relationships. Our actions are going to have to back up our words. We're going to have to put our actions where our mouth is. You may remember the story, James, about the boy in love who was talking to his girlfriend on the phone, and he said, oh, darling, I'd cross the deepest sea for you. I'd cross the greatest wasteland. I'd turn over the mountains just to be with you, and I'll see you Saturday night if it doesn't rain. Words and actions are going to have to be synonymous with each other. But not only do our actions have to back up our own words, our actions have to respond to the words of others. We have to put our actions where our ears are. Because as people talk to us, as they tell us about their needs, about their concerns, about their longings, about their criticisms, we have to be willing to be changed by what we hear. It's not enough for us to talk about people's needs. We have to respond to those needs. It's not enough to listen to people's criticisms. We have to be willing to be changed by those criticisms and to be made better by them. So we've talked about some relationship skills, and particularly about some communication skills that I hope will help us all to have deeper relationships in the local church. Can I close by challenging you to think about something with me? There is a standard of action, a standard of behavior to which we as Christians are to be held. Jesus wants us to act towards each other, to behave towards each other in particular ways. Wouldn't it be nice if we as Christians could behave towards each other as Jesus has behaved towards us? Wouldn't that be something? There's a passage in the book of 1 John found in chapter 3 and verse 16 that sounds like this. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. But what if that standard is too high for us? What if we can't reach quite that high? Wouldn't it be nice if we could treat each other, behave towards each other, act towards each other, like Jesus wants us to act towards our neighbor? Do you remember the parable in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus talks about a Samaritan who finds a man on the side of the road? Jesus says we're to treat our neighbors as we would want to be treated. We're to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We're to respond to their needs. We're to give them what they need when they need it. Wouldn't it be good if we as Christians could act towards each other in that way? But what if even that standard is too high? What if going that far is even too much? Don't you think that at the very least, as Christians, we in our relationships with other Christians could treat each other as well as Jesus wants us to treat our enemies? Is that asking too much? If you look in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6, there's a beautiful passage there that talks about how we are to respond to our enemies. Listen to what Jesus says. I tell you who hear me, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If anyone strikes you on one cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone takes your cloak, don't stop him from taking your tunic. Give to everyone who asks you. And if anyone takes what belongs to you, don't demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. And he goes on, and he talks about some other ways that we as Christians are expected to treat enemies. Oh, how I wish that in the church, if we can't treat each other like Jesus has treated us, and if we can't quite treat each other as God expects us to treat our neighbor, if we just treat each other as God asks us to treat our enemies, there would be quite a transformation in the church. We've got to love each other. That begins with good relationship attitudes. But it must progress to good relationship skills. And we hope that what we've talked about to you today will be helpful to all of us to develop the kinds of skills we need to love each other in the church.
We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. We are one in the Spirit. We are one in the Lord. And we